Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Amit Harari, and coming up in today's newscast. Drama unfolds as Knesset votes for Judicial Selection Committee members, coalition vs opposition clash. Meantime, faulty security measures at fatal border attack now being exposed in new IDF inquiry. And later, Special in Uniform celebrating 500 performance, captivating the audience's hearts and minds. We're opening with the drama in the Knesset today over the decisive vote for the Judicial Selection Committee, with members voting on a matter that could determine the course of the ongoing talks at the president's residence over the government's judicial reforms. But of course, there were a lot of twists and turns. Voting has come to an end today afternoon at the Knesset for the two Knesset members for the Judicial Selection Committee, but not before a lot of drama unfolded. Earlier in the day, Prime Minister Netanyahu told Likud members to vote against all candidates in hopes of forcing the Judicial Selection Committee staffing vote back by 1 month. National Unity Party leader Benny Gantz warned if the coalition moves ahead with its plan to push off a vote on the members of the Judicial Selection Committee, then his party will quit the ongoing judicial reform negotiations. The Knesset was due to choose representatives to the judicial appointment committees that selects judges at all levels of the Israeli court system. Opposition leaders Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz said ahead of the voting that if opposition member Karine El-Arar from Yesh Atid is not one of those selected, they will leave the judicial reform talks underway at the president's residence. The 9-member Judicial Selection Committee includes 2 representatives from the Knesset. Although not required by law, the coalition traditionally occupies one spot and enables the opposition to occupy the other. The vote was secret, and therefore, if more than one coalition candidate remained by the time the vote starts, there was no way to ensure ahead of time that one spot will go to the opposition. Earlier today, we were joined by Executive Director of Honest Reporting and former Jerusalem Post political analyst Gail Hoffman. Gill, what a crazy day. Netanyahu delayed the vote and then started again. Now they're counting the votes. What's going on?
Very big mess all day in the Knesset, Meet. When Netanyahu came to the Knesset today, he intended to go with the flow, allow a representative of the opposition and a representative of the coalition to both be chosen to the Judicial Selection Committee, which then the Justice Minister could decide whether or not to convene. But instead, when he was facing a challenge from the hawks inside his faction and from Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir from his coalition, he decided to play a trick on the opposition to instead delay the vote for a month using a tactical parliamentary procedure that I won't bore the viewers with. But this was a very big risk because it's liable to end the proceedings at the president's residence and reaching a compromise that we're making a lot of progress and ignite significant protests that when we tape this, we're planned to be airing when this runs.
Now, we see that Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid said that if the Knesset members were not chosen today, it would be the end of judicial reform talks at the president's residence. Is it?
Well, depending on the results of the vote that we are currently awaiting while we tape this, the leaders of the Yesh Atid and the party of Benny Gantz were holding a press conference where they would be announcing whether they would be leaving the president's residence if their representative Karine El-Arar was not chosen.
What do we know about Tali Gottlieb right now? She's also a name that popped up like in recent hours.
Okay, so Tali Gottlieb was urged by the Prime Minister to drop her candidacy, and she refused, which made it much harder for Netanyahu to proceed with his parliamentary maneuver. She is been proven to be a very independently minded member of Knesset who is not someone who the prime minister can control. And the members of Knesset, she has a lot of enemies that she's made in a very short period of time in the Knesset, which does not help one get elected to anything. So right now she's been a thorn in the side from the parliamentary trick that Netanyahu wanted to play.
Now, was this whole crazy situation today sort of like a sign of weakness for the prime minister, for Netanyahu? I mean, would he not have preferred to have the issue behind him?
Netanyahu is a man of the world. Netanyahu lives the economy. He wants to be chosen to come to the White House soon. And instead, he's been shunned by President Biden. He's been warned by the heads of the credit agencies, Standard & Poor's, Fitch, and Moody's. He sees the problems with the shekel against the dollar, and he wanted to be able to compromise, and the more far-right elements did not let him. So yes, that does make the prime minister look weaker, that he could have taken a leadership step and proved unable to.
Now, what's next moving forward? Might the coalition revert to its original judicial reform plan? I mean, what do you see happening now?
The coalition cannot go back to what they initially proposed, the more extreme, far-reaching judicial overhaul. What they can do is to try to pass its most consensus elements. That's something that could still happen in the weeks ahead. And the opposition members of Knesset who supported some of these steps in the past will do what they can to prevent them from passing now, but they can't stop them as long as Netanyahu maintains his majority in the Knesset.
Does this, Gill, move, strengthen or weaken, really, Prime Minister Netanyahu and his coalition? I mean, again, as you said before about Tali Gottlieb, one that's already sort of like doing independently what she wants. Do you see it weakening or strengthening the coalition?
The coalition itself, is getting stronger because the more that they stay right-wing, then they deal with the lowest common denominator on the right that unites them. It's when Netanyahu starts making compromises with the opposition, with the center, with the left, and with the international community, that's what causes rifts within the coalition, and that we had until Netanyahu decided to play this parliamentary trick today.
So we're hearing about a planned protest today. Do you see a return to the mass disruptions, mass protests that we saw until a few weeks ago? Obviously, it never really stopped, but the big ones in the middle of the week that we used to see every other day?
What really stopped the mass protests was that there were talks going on in the president's residence that gave people hope that a compromise could be reached and that Netanyahu would not put forward any steps without there being this consensus. And if Netanyahu has bypassed the president's committee and if those talks are done, then yes, people will go back en masse to the streets demanding that nothing in Netanyahu's program and Yariv Levin, the Justice Minister's program, be passed.
Gail Hoffman, we will have a lot to be updated on this evening. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
The search continues for the Palestinian terrorist responsible for yesterday's drive-by shooting attack in Samaria that left an Israeli civilian and 4 soldiers wounded. The IDF tracked the terrorist cell into the Balata refugee camp. And more in this report by ILTV's Steve Leibovich.
5 Israelis, including 4 soldiers, were wounded in the drive-by shooting attack near the community of Mevo Dotan in northern Samaria. The terrorists fired from a moving car, first firing at the car of a 33-year-old Israeli civilian. They then continued down the road firing at a military vehicle, wounding 4 soldiers who were in light to moderate condition. The wounded man managed to drive to the nearest IDF post, where he was treated and then transferred to Hillel Yafa Medical Center for further treatment. The soldiers are also being treated in hospitals. IDF forces immediately launched a search for the gunmen. They operated in the Palestinian towns of Yabad, near the scene of the attack, and Balata refugee camp near Nablus. Armed clashes were reported in Balata as the forces surrounded a home in the camp, conducting arrests. 1 Palestinian was reportedly killed and at least 3 others injured in the clashes.
So we know the news is fast-paced, and we want to let you know that ILTV's new app is now available. So if you want to stay connected to the latest news from Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, download our new app now on all your devices. It's available in the App Store for both Android and iPhone. The IDF published the investigation of the attack on the Egyptian border in which 3 IDF soldiers were killed. The investigation mainly shows that everything from guarding procedures and more could have been carried out differently. Now ILTV's William Sharon reports.
The IDF published the investigation of the attack on the Egyptian border in which late Sergeant Leah Ben Nun, late Sergeant Ori Yitzchak Iluz, and late Sergeant Ohad Shimon Dahan were killed following the infiltration of the Egyptian terrorist. The investigation itself detailed the sequence of events during the attack. The terrorist, an Egyptian policeman, penetrated into Israeli territory through a security crossing at the fence and shot at late Sergeant Uri Yitzchak Iluz and late Sergeant Leah Ben Nun, who were at the guard post near the border, killing the 2. Hours later, the terrorist was identified and fired from long range towards an IDF force that returned fire. Then, the commander of the Faran Brigade, Sergeant Ohad Shimon Dahan, was killed, and so was the terrorist. According to the investigation, the main reasons for the occurrence of the incident are non-locking of the security crossing at the fence, suboptimal security of the border area, and placing emphasis on preparedness for smuggling incidents instead of security ones. The investigation did not find any fault in the conduct of the soldiers who were killed. Following the investigation findings, it was decided to take command measures against several officials. The Spatial Division commander will be reprimanded by a command. The commander of the Spatial Division, Faran, will be transferred from his position, even though it was stated that he acted properly, and the Baldelas battalion commander, whose 2 soldiers were killed in the attack, will be reprimanded, and his promotion will be delayed for 5 years.
The United States and Iran are in talks for a mini deal that Israel can live with. That's the word from Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly told the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee about details of a potential nuclear deal between Washington and Tehran. And ILTV's Steve Leibovich has more.
Referring to the 2015 nuclear agreement that Washington quit in 2018, Netanyahu said what's on the agenda is a mini agreement and not a full agreement. It's not a nuclear deal. The United States and Iran are in talks for a mini deal that Israel can live with, said Netanyahu. According to Walla, the so-called mini deal being negotiated includes a stipulation that Iran will not enrich uranium above 60%, and in exchange the U.S. will release Iranian funds that are being held abroad under sanctions. The 2 sides would also carry out a prisoner exchange. U.S. officials yesterday confirmed that Washington is in contacts with Iran regarding the long-stalled nuclear talks, but denied that talks on an interim agreement were taking place.
That there are a number of reports we have seen by various outlets about different deals or purported deals or diplomatic negotiations. The vast majority of those reports have been either wrong or completely misleading, and that includes reports of an interim deal.
Netanyahu earlier sent a message to the U.S. that Israel would not see itself bound by any agreement Washington might reach with Iran over its nuclear program. The Prime Minister said Israel remained opposed to a return to the original 2015 nuclear deal, which the U.S. pulled out of under former President Donald Trump.
The U.S. House of Representatives has overwhelmingly approved legislation requiring the appointment of a special envoy for the Abraham Accords, aimed at encouraging more countries to follow in the footsteps of the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco in normalizing relations with Israel. In a major development, the U.S. House of Representatives has overwhelmingly passed legislation mandating the appointment of a special envoy for the Abraham Accords. The special envoy will be responsible for encouraging other countries to follow suit and strengthen existing agreements between Israel and Muslim-majority nations. The bipartisan legislation introduced by Democratic Representatives Richie Torres and Republican Representative Michael Lawler emphasizes the coordination of efforts across the U.S. government and engagement with foreign governments and stakeholders. However, the appointment of the special envoy will require Senate confirmation, potentially politicizing the process. The bill received significant support, passing with a vote of 413 to 13, with some progressive Democrats and conservative Republicans opposing it. Although the House has approved the bill, it still needs to pass through the Senate to become a law. The Senate legislation seeks to take a more comprehensive approach to strengthen the Abraham Accords. It not only focuses on establishing a special envoy position, but also encourages the expansion of the Negev Forum, an initiative by the Biden administration aiming to develop regional projects and improve the lives of Palestinians. While U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken recently announced plans to appoint a point person for the Abraham Accords, proponents of the congressional efforts argue that consistent pressure from the Hill is essential to keep the administration focused on these issues. On the other hand, some within the administration feel that the congressional efforts may be excessive and not contribute significantly to advancing the Abraham Accords. Nonetheless, the administration acknowledges the initiative and expresses a willingness to work with Congress to address this important matter. The Biden administration has prioritized Israel integration in the region, viewing it as a cornerstone of its Middle East policy. A program by Jewish National Fund USA allows teens with special needs in Israel's elite military squad celebrate 500 performance, unleashing the power of music.
The Israeli military has a secret weapon, a highly trained squad of elite soldiers that's entirely made up of disabled and autistic teens. Special in Uniform is a Jewish National Fund USA program that integrates young adults with disabilities into the Israel Defense Forces, and in turn into Israeli society. Its core belief is that everyone belongs and has the right to reach his or her full potential.
500 performances that Special in Uniform band gave all over the world. They have been in Mexico, they have been in the US, in Florida, in Philadelphia, in so many other places. And they performed in front of 18,000 people. Think of someone that, to all his life, was terrified from standing on stage, and suddenly is performing in front of so many. So when we are talking about music, music means love. Music means so many hugs and so many love that they are getting. And due to that, a lot of people with special need are getting so much love from all the others. And more than that, the awareness that they are bringing for people with special need is enormous. And we are so thankful for this program that enabled them to become part of society.
We prepared so much for this performance, and we are so excited and grateful for this opportunity. So amazing.
The Special in Uniform musical program aims to integrate our Special in Uniform soldiers even further into Israeli society, and nowadays culminates in a momentous occasion as they commemorate their 500th performance at Zappa Tel Aviv, a renowned club where esteemed artists grace the stage to captivate audiences.
The sky is the limit. We are going to see them everywhere. We are going to see them at the largest stages all over the world. And here in Israel, they are performing in front of all the high-ranked officers. They are being invited to so many ceremonies. And we are so proud of them. And I can say one more thing. They are bringing themselves to every place with so much happiness. So we are so thankful for this amazing program, and also for the JNF that enable us to make this program so prosperous.
Turbulences and hidden pressure changes in the air can cause unpleasant shaking during flights, and now a recent study reveals a direct relationship between rising temperatures and a significant surge in turbulence across the Earth's troposphere, the region where aircraft operate. And unfortunately, present-day technology lacks the capability to detect or provide adequate warning for this heightened turbulence phenomenon. And joining us now to tell us everything about it is someone who is no stranger to the phenomenon at all, is El Al Airlines pilot Captain Itzhak Garber. Well, Itzik, firstly, tell us some more about yourself, what aircraft you're flying, and your work in general.
Hello, thank you for having me. So I'm a pilot, I'm a captain for about 38 years, 30 years of them as a commercial pilot, which fly passengers from place to place all over the world. I'm flying currently the Boeing 777 and the Boeing 787, which is called the Dreamliner. Well, I heard about this phenomenon. I cannot argue with the statistics, but sometimes I think all passengers had some turbulence in their flights. Yes, that's correct.
Now, this heightened turbulence phenomenon, how dangerous is it really, if at all?
Well, that's a good question. We are dividing turbulence to three categories. One is minor, which is very low turbulence. We have medium turbulence and severe turbulence. Usually we encounter minor to medium turbulence, but also the severe turbulence are not that dangerous because the aircraft are built very strong. They can observe a lot of efforts of the turbulence, and there is no aircraft that flew out of the sky because of turbulence. It is really safe. It's unpleasant, but there is one thing that passengers should do in order to be safe, and that's comply with the flight attendants' instructions when this happens.
That's totally correct. Now, can it be prevented? I mean, how can you as pilots maybe prevent it or control it?
Well, we have maps, meteorological maps, which are significant maps that show us before the flight where should be the areas of these turbulence. We also have radar to try to track them. And we also hear from other pilots if they encounter turbulence. So they're say it on the VHF, on the radio, and we can participate, have some advantage on the turbulence. But if we encounter turbulence, there are still some things that we can do. We can lower the airspeed, sometimes increasing airspeed, sometimes changing levels. We cannot do it all the time because sometimes there is an aircraft above us, so we cannot climb or we are too heavy to climb. But most of the time we can change the situation a bit, improve it a bit, and that way or another, after a few minutes, it's demolished and we can go on with our flight.
Yitzhak, and what does this phenomenon actually look like from your cockpit? I mean, how can it be foreseen and what does it really look like in practice to you?
Well, usually we have those turbulence when we have clouds. When we have big clouds, we try to avoid them, but sometimes we fly in those clouds if it is allowed, and then we can feel this turbulence. Sometimes there are small lightning on the, let's say, on the windshield itself, but still it's not dangerous at all.
Well, that's interesting, and most importantly, many people are anxious flying. I mean, you surely know that firsthand. Is there a message you'd like to convey to our viewers, to passengers in general?
Yeah, I think that it is really safe to fly, even in turbulence. The only thing that is needed by the passengers is when you see this silver sign on, so fasten your seatbelt and stay in your seat. That will cover all possibilities of injuries. Sometimes you see this illumination of the seatbelt sign and you don't feel any turbulence. So you say, hey, where the turbulence are? They might come in 5 to 10 minutes. As we said, we hear it from other pilots and we're trying to figure out where it is. So if you are seated with your seatbelt fastened, everything should be okay.
Well, I heard more than once that flying a plane is safer than driving a car. So, Captain Gail, thank you so much for joining us today and calming us down.
Thank you very much.
Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Clear skies tonight are expected around most of the country with lows of around 19 degrees Celsius or 66 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we will see cloudy skies alongside steady top temperatures, seeing highs of about 28 degrees Celsius or 83 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channels, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and do not forget to check out our new and improved website, ILTV.tv, with all of the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm Amit Harari. Be well. Thank you so much for watching.